What's up, everybody? Matt Gajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel, talking some college football DFS ahead of Week 4, Thursday night, 3-game slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And if you've never heard of Prize Picks, phenomenal offer for you guys. You can click the link in the video description below for a first match deposit bonus up to $100. But what is Prize Picks? They are a platform where you play daily prop-based contests, no sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You can create lineups of player props up to 5 players in each lineup where you can win 10 extra entry fee. And you can use cross knowledge of sports. You can play college football with baseball, NFL, whatever it is you know, you can take advantage of that. Again, hit the link in the video description below to take advantage. All right, bringing you behind the paywall, we're going to talk some usage data in all 3 of these games that we have on Thursday night. Kicking things off, we've got West Virginia, Virginia Tech. Up at the top, you are going to see a lot of the team-by-team statistics, plays per game, pass rate. OL is just sacks allowed. DL is sacks generated on defense. Vegas statistics, and then defensive passing yards allowed per game, per attempt. Same thing with rushing to the right of that. This game, 1.5-point spread in favor of West Virginia. Virginia Tech been taking a lot of money. The over-under is 50.5. A lot of that because Virginia Tech plays slow, but they also might be in a weather-induced environment. We will have to see on that, but just check the weather report. Could be something to monitor. Generally not a major concern for me outside of crazy situations, but you never know. So keep that in mind. For West Virginia, JT Daniels at Signal Caller, just a 3-game slate. So immediately we need to take a look at really every Signal Caller on the slate. But Daniels, he stands out to me as somebody maybe for GPPs, averaging about 35 pass attempts per game, 250 yards. The issue is he does not run at all. Stable in his career. So Daniels is a guy I think you should be using carefully in tournaments, especially in a game that might have some bad overall weather. He kind of needs a ceiling passing. And then Virginia Tech has just been the absolute stones on defense, allowing 4.6 yards per pass attempt. I see a tough sledding for Daniels. He's still viable in tournaments because of the stacking upside. And there are pretty easy options to stack him with. Bryce Ford Wheaton has a 32% target share. He's averaging 99 receiving yards per game, just shy of that 100-yard bonus. 12.7 targets. He is the most targeted receiver on this slate on a per-game basis. He's the pay-up option. From there, Sam James and Caden Prather. Sam James actually has a better route rate than Prather. It's about 80% to 60%. But the targets, they've favored Prather of late. 10 targets for him, just 2 targets for Sam James in their last game. James still more efficient, though. 194 yards to Prather's 151. There is about 6 targets separating them over the course of the year. West Virginia does use 4 wide a fair amount. When they do so, it's Reese Smith. When they go into traditional situations, it's Mike O'Loughlin at tight end, neither of whom are particularly strong plays outside of just GPPs. The backfield. Thought this was going to be the Tony Mathis show coming into the year, but man, almost called him a rookie. Freshman CJ Donaldson. He's listed as a tight end on the depth chart. He was recruited as a tight end. He's listed as a receiver on DraftKings. That's because they just label all tight ends receivers, but he's been playing running back for this team. 7 carries, 13 carries, and 10 carries. He's a legitimate 1B to Tony Mathis's 1A in this offense. On the year, Mathis has 52 opportunities. CJ Donaldson has 33. That's 17.3 opportunities per game for Mathis, 11 per game for Donaldson. Donaldson's running laps around Mathis. Wouldn't be surprised if this flips at any point. For what it's worth, Mathis has been the clear pass-catching back. He has 3 targets this year. But we know Donaldson's a former tight end, receiver, whatever you want to call him. That suggests he has that pedigree too. Donaldson's really interesting at 4,300, and you play him in the receiver spot. Going to Virginia Tech. Grant Wells transferred in from Marshall. He's had a pitiful season to start. No fault of his own. Put in an impossible situation with really bad receivers, poor offensive line. Wells is mobile, 66 yards on the ground, but he averages just 217 through the air. It's going to be tough for him, 32 attempts per game. The defense for West Virginia doesn't scare you. They certainly have a weakness in the secondary. They're allowing nearly 10 yards per pass attempt, but in a poor game environment, Wells is just as risky as Daniels on the other side. We'll talk about two quarterbacks that are firmly ahead of them, but for now, I think these are GPP options. For stacking, Nick Gallo is really the only one with a consistent role. He has 19 targets. That's a 20% target share. He's still the third leading receiver. Steven Gosnell's been their number 2. He has 103 yards, which is second on the team in receiving. He's had a pretty consistent route rate, but he was listed as a backup this week. That's concerning. That's because Jaden Blue seems to have finally emerged. His route rate crested 50% last week for the first time all year, 6 targets for him. He was supposed to be the wide receiver 1 heading into the season, but an injury stunted his growth with the team. So Jaden Blue back at 5,100 is a lot to pay, but I think he's the wide receiver 1 over the course of the year. From there, Dwayne Lofton and Caleb Smith were the other 2 listed starting receivers. Smith far more efficient than Lofton, but nothing really separating these guys in terms of route run. None of them are full-time route getters. They will involve Connor Blumrick. They'll involve Keyshawn Moss. I would be surprised if any one of them consistently hit 70% route percentage this year outside of somebody emerging. And again, I think Blue is the favorite for that. Easy avoid. Probably just play Gallo. There's a lot less rotation at the tight end position. In the backfield, Keyshawn King is supposedly returning here. That means I think he just takes over his role as lead back here. He started the year as the lead back, 19 carries for him in week 1, and he outcarried Chance Black and Jalen Holston, wasn't even close. Since then, he got injured in week 2, carried 5 times, had over 60 yards on just that limited opportunity, so elite option here in the backfield. Without him, Jalen Holston and Chance Black have both played a fair amount, neither of whom has been any good. I think Keyshawn King comes right back in and handles his every down role. Maybe you see Holston and Black form change of pace, but Keyshawn King's the guy you want here. Game 2, we have Coastal Carolina taking on Georgia State. 2.5-point spread in favor of Coastal. Georgia State's been taking some money, see some 2s out there. 61.5 game total. It's clearly the top game on the slate. Coastal is going to play slow, methodical, very run-heavy. Georgia State's the same, except they play with tempo. Grayson McCall immediately has to be considered one of the best quarterbacks on the slate. He has 53 rushing yards. That's far below his career averages per game, so we know he's mobile. That's certainly something that they'll use. And as a passer, 244 passing yards on just 23.7 attempts. This guy has a career average north of 10 yards per attempt. Every time Grayson McCall throws a pass, in the history of his career, he's averaging a first down. In this game environment, which again is much better than the previous, Grayson McCall is going to be a top 2 quarterback option. In the backfield, it's been a 1-2 punch with Reese White and CJ Beasley to start this year. Reese White, only 3 touches in their last game. He fumbled, and they put him in the doghouse for it. Not a close game for Coastal. They rolled Buffalo, so didn't necessarily need to use him. Reese White has been hyper efficient when he's touched the ball, though, so I would expect him to return to that 1-2 punch. But if you are a little weary of that, CJ Beasley's been consistent. Only 3 touches separate these guys over the course of the year. And CJ Beasley's also been really efficient. These guys each already have over 200 yards rushing, both capable pass catchers with a slight edge towards Reese White. But even in their last game, Beasley 3 targets, White 1. So they're comfortable with Beasley in this role. For those of you playing the safe route, Beasley at a cheaper price, not really at risk of the doghouse unless he fumbles, not expecting that. I think he's the safer option between the 2, but both are in play. At receiver, for those of you stacking McCall, historically a good idea, especially in high total games. Transfer Sam Pinckney comes over. He's the wide receiver 1, 36% target share, 86 yards per game, averaging 8.3 targets. Just very clearly the wide receiver 1. If you can get him, do so. Behind him, Jared Brown and Tyson Mobley, the next 2. Very little separates these guys, but Brown is more involved from a routes perspective. He also averages more targets, 3.7 to Mobley's 3.0. I think you play Brown if you can. You should be able to. He's cheaper, but Mobley, for that reason, is going to be a GPP option providing leverage. He's just been less involved and he's more expensive, which doesn't make a lot of sense. For Georgia State, we have Darren Granger, veteran signal caller. 5,800 is super cheap for him. He's similar to Grayson McCall, but more involved in the run game. He already has 172 yards on the ground this year. That's crazy. He's averaging over 50 rushing yards per game. And he's giving you 213 as a passer, 29 attempts. Granger's a solid play here. They're only slight underdogs. Their team total is nearly 30 points. with as involved as he is on the ground, Granger is an excellent play, top 2 quarterback option on the slate. Running back's also a little bit tricky here, and that's kind of the theme of the show. Tricky running back situation across the board with Donaldson for West Virginia, Keyshawn King returning from injury, Reese White in the doghouse potentially after fumbling, and maybe Jamius Williams is in the doghouse for Georgia State. He led the team in touches in week 1, but since then, he was really inefficient last week. This Georgia State team, that's Jamius Williams we're talking about, and they moved to Marcus Carroll as the change of pace. Marcus Carroll, hyper efficient on 15 carries. No touches in the pass game for him. But these are still the 2 change of pace options. Tucker Gregg is the RB1. He's averaging about 70 rushing yards per game, just shy of that. Somewhat involved in the pass game. He is the most routes on the team. You're going to see Jamius Williams is the only player targeted. Just know that Tucker Gregg has run more routes. That'll normalize. And he's now a player that's touched the ball in an ascending direction, 11 carries, 18 carries, 23 carries. He's the safest of the 3, and he's only 4,800. Again, Jamius Williams is 45. You have to take on the risk if you're going to play him. Carroll's 4K flat. I think Carroll and Williams are in play for tournaments, but as far as just safety, Gregg is the guy you're looking at. Receiver. We actually got, it's not positive news, but it at least condenses opportunity for receivers. Terrence Dixon tore his ACL. So we no longer have a rotation at receiver. It is Jamari Thrash, it is Robert Lewis, and it is Josias Credle. Hope I am saying that correctly, Mr. Credle. Apologize if I am not. Jamari Thrash, wide receiver 1 here, averaging 10.3 targets per game, 37.5% target share, 112 yards. He should probably be the most expensive receiver on the slate, maybe outside of Bryce Ford-Wheaton, and he's not. He's probably a lock and load option. Robert Lewis, great pivot, 25.3% target share. He's 4,600. These are just laughable price tags on these guys. Every single one of these players is a firm play in DFS. Credle's 3,300. That's because of the injury. But without Dixon last week, 6 targets for him. These guys are awesome plays. And even Chris Bird, their tight end, he saw an elevated route share without Dixon as well. He now has 9 targets in the last 2 games. I'd rather play Credle, but certainly for GPPs, that's a guy I'll look at. This is a great passing attack to target. Last game, Chattanooga, Illinois. No spread for this game yet, so I went and I looked at S&P Plus, took the projected spread and threw it into the top bar. So S&P Plus had Illinois as minus 13 with a 41 total. The final score per S&P Plus was 27-14. They're pretty accurate. The spread should be somewhere around there. Maybe you see Illinois as a slightly higher favorite, but don't expect this one to be crazy and expect it to be low scoring overall. Chattanooga is really run heavy and really slow. Now, they're a really good FCS team, as you probably gathered by the spread, and you might recognize some names in this offense. Preston Hutchinson, former Eastern Michigan signal caller, is with Chattanooga, and he's been good so far this year, albeit against FCS competition. He's averaging 250 passing yards in just 25 attempts. That's really efficient. 80 rushing yards, a little bit mobile here too. But we have a pretty good sample of him at the FBS level. He's facing a tough team and a good defense in Illinois. I think he's at least 5th or 6th in terms of quarterback rankings on this slate. Their implied team total is 14 points, so that makes sense. They do use a bell cow, and they run the ball a ton. So Aleem Ford at 4,100. He's a guy that has touched the ball at least 20 times in every one of his games. He's an active pass catcher. We haven't really seen that yet because they've been in positive game script for most of the year, but averaging over 100 yards per game. He's really cheap. If you're pivoting off like a Gregg or something, I think Ford's in play for tournaments. And then wide receiver. This has been a mess. First and foremost, Javin Watley missed their most recent game. Don't expect an update on him. This is Chattanooga. I don't know why DraftKings put this on the slate, but we have a team that basically has no beat reporting. They're not going to update you likely before game time. So just tread carefully if you're playing Watley. He led the team in targets prior to last week's game. Without him, it did condense routes and snaps and targets to Jamoy Mays and Sam Phillips. These are the top 2 guys. They're under 4K. If you're playing one of them, I think that's fine. There's no real need to go below that. Like Keyshawn Toney's the tight end. His route rate's not quite as good. Tyron Arnett, Javon Burke. These guys are part-time players. They're barely above 3K. Burke's at 3K flat. Arnett's at 3.2. Just fine. The 400 or 600 play Mays or Phillips. They're clearly better plays in a vacuum. And then Illinois to close things out. I don't know what the deal is with Tommy DeVito's price tag. 8,800. He should be cheaper than Granger, but you're saving 3K by playing Granger. He has 29 rushing yards, which isn't great. That's well below his career average, but Illinois is clearly not using him in that capacity. 207 passing yards. That's a staple of this offense. They're going to be run heavy, but DeVito's not really involved. That's going to be a problem. So he is a game manager with an implied team total below Georgia State and Coastal Carolina at an elevated price. Outside of tournaments, he's an easy fade. In the run game, Chase Brown's the number one running back on the slate, even though he's expensive. He is a monster upside in competitive games. 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago now, that this is week 1. They did play a week 0 game. We saw him touch the ball 38 times. No other RB has that upside on this slate. And he's really efficient, averaging 163 rushing yards per game. Very involved in the pass game. Chase Brown's a lock and load option. Reggie Love would be the change of pace with Chase Hayden occasionally getting a carry. In the receiving game, tough to target any of these guys. None of them play 70% of the routes. In fact, the only player who's touched 70% in an individual game is Pat Bryant. So tough. But with that said, Isaiah Williams is still a pretty good target getter for this team. Very low ADOT variety, 9.7 targets per game, 30% target share, just 52 yards, which speaks to the low ADOT. Pat Bryant's been explosive. He's averaging 49 yards on just 11 targets. That's far more efficient than Isaiah Williams, but the role's not consistent. Then Brian Hightower splitting time with Casey Washington. It's all a rotation for these guys, so they're not going to project quite as well as some others on the slate. Again, most of those options are going to come from the Coastal Georgia State game. But if you're weary of the potential weather in Virginia Tech, maybe you play a one-off here. Tight end is being split 3 ways between Tip Ryman, Michael Marchese, and Luke Ford. Outside of Showdown, you're not really considering those guys. But that'll do it for us today. Let me know in the comment section what you think of these plays, who your favorite options are, who you think wins the game. I'll make sure to get back to you in the comments. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm available on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. You can always find me there. Until next time, guys, we will see you later, and good luck.